Elena Vasquez, the 52-year-old founder and CEO of Sunlit Harvest, a thriving organic grocery chain, stood in the dimly lit parking lot of one of her stores, staring at the cheerful green sign above the entrance. It was a crisp March morning in 2025, and the air carried the faint scent of blooming flowers from the nearby planters, a signature touch she'd insisted on when the company first began. Sunlit Harvest had grown from a single roadside stand into a nationwide sensation, with over 300 locations across the country. Elena had built it on a vision of fresh, sustainable food in a workplace where employees thrived as much as the produce they sold. But lately, whispers of discontent had reached her ears, rising turnover, complaints about management, and a dip in customer satisfaction. Reports from her executive team painted a rosy picture, but something gnawed at her. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't tell the whole story either. Determined to uncover the truth, Elena decided to go undercover. She enlisted the help of a friend from her theater days, a makeup artist named Clara, who transformed her into Marisol, a soft-spoken, gray-haired woman in her late 60s looking for part-time work to supplement her retirement. Clara worked magic, a wig of wiry silver curls, subtle prosthetics to round out her cheekbones, and a pair of slightly smudged glasses that perched on her nose. Elena swapped her tailored suits for a faded cardigan and sensible shoes, practicing a slight shuffle in her walk to complete the disguise. When she looked in the mirror, even she didn't recognize herself. She chose a store in a bustling coastal town she'd never visited as CEO, one of the chain's top performers, according to sales data. If problems existed even here, Elena reasoned, they might be systemic. She applied online as a stock clerk, claiming a vague history of retail work, and was called in for an interview the next day. The manager, a wiry man named Victor with a perpetually furrowed brow, barely glanced at her resume before hiring her. "We're short-handed," he grumbled, scribbling her name on a clipboard. "Can you start tomorrow?" Elena nodded, suppressing a smile. Step 1 was complete. Her first shift began at 6 a.m. before the store opened to customers. As Marisol, Elena shuffled into the stockroom, her hands trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of the role. It had been decades since she'd last stacked shelves or hauled crates, back when Sunlit Harvest was just a dream. The air smelled of fresh citrus and damp cardboard, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. She was assigned to work alongside a young woman named Priya, whose sharp eyes and quick movements suggested she'd been at this a while. The morning was quiet at first, with only the hum of refrigerators and the occasional clatter of boxes. Elena kept her head down, unpacking jars of artisanal jam and listening as Priya muttered under her breath. "This is ridiculous," Priya said, tossing an empty crate aside with more force than necessary. "They expect us to finish all this before the doors open, but half the shipment's late again." Elena glanced at her, keeping her tone gentle. "Does that happen a lot?" Priya snorted, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "Every week. Victor doesn't care, he just yells at us to figure it out. Like we're magicians." Elena's stomach twisted. She'd spent years negotiating with suppliers to ensure timely deliveries. If this was a recurring issue, why hadn't it reached her desk? She decided to probe further. "What's Victor like to work for?" she asked, arranging jars in neat rows. Priya hesitated, then lowered her voice. "He's a tyrant. Doesn't lift a finger himself, but if one shelf isn't perfect, he's on you like you ruined his life. Last week, he made Javier cry because a display wasn't aesthetic enough. Javier's 17, give him a break." Before Elena could respond, a lanky young man with a mop of curly hair, presumably Javier, poked his head into the aisle. "Priya, watch out. Victor's on the warpath. Someone left a spill by the dairy case, and he's blaming us." Priya groaned. "Of course he is. Did he grab a mop?" "Nope, just screaming about it." Javier smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'd quit if I didn't need the cash. My sister's in college, and I'm helping her out. Elena's heart sank. These weren't lazy workers, they were stretched thin, supporting families, and clearly frustrated. As the store opened and customers trickled in, the tension only grew. She trailed Priya to the front, where a cashier named Marcus was ringing up a line of shoppers. His hands moved fast, but his jaw was tight. "Victor's got me pulling doubles again," he muttered to Priya as Elena lingered nearby, pretending to straighten a display. "I asked for a day off to see my kid's school play, and he said, maybe if you worked harder, I'd consider it." "Like, what?" Priya shook her head. "He's the worst. I had to beg for a half-day when my grandma passed, and he acted like I was asking for a vacation." Marcus laughed bitterly. "They don't care about us, Priya. We're just cogs. I bet the big shots at corporate don't even know what's happening here." Elena froze, her fingers tightening around a jar of honey. She wanted to interject, to tell them she did care, but Marisol couldn't. Instead, she shuffled closer and asked, "Do you think they'd listen if they knew?" Marcus shrugged. "Doubt it. They're too busy counting their money." Priya nodded. "Yeah, Sunlight's supposed to be all values and community, but it's a joke here. Victor runs this place like a prison." The rest of the shift was a blur of small revelations. A produce worker complained about a broken cooler that hadn't been fixed in months, forcing them to toss out spoiled goods. A janitor muttered about being denied overtime pay despite working late to clean up after a spill Victor had ignored. By the time Elena clocked out, her head was spinning. This wasn't the sunlit harvest she'd poured her soul into. How had it drifted so far? On her drive home, the coastal highway stretched out before her, waves crashing against the shore. She replayed every word she'd heard, every tired face she'd seen. Anger bubbled up, at Victor, at her executive team for shielding her from this, at herself for not noticing sooner. But beneath it was something else, determination. She couldn't unhear these stories or unsee these struggles. Sunlit Harvest wasn't just a business, it was her legacy, and she'd fight to reclaim it. That night, Elena sat at her kitchen table, a notebook open in front of her. She scribbled names, Priya, Javier, Marcus, people who'd unknowingly lit a fire under her. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing: she'd return to the store tomorrow, dig deeper, and find a way to make this right. This wasn't just about one location anymore, it was about every employee who'd been let down. And Elena Vasquez wasn't one to back down from a challenge. As she sipped her tea, the moonlight filtering through the window, she felt a spark she hadn't in years. The road ahead would be tough, confronting managers, overhauling systems, facing the truth about her company's failures, but it was a road worth taking. She'd built Sunlit Harvest from nothing once. She could rebuild it into something better. Tomorrow, Marisol would clock in again, but Elena was already planning her next move. The employees didn't know it yet, but their voices had reached the top, and change was coming. The next morning, Elena Vasquez woke before dawn, her mind buzzing with the revelations from her first day undercover at Sunlit Harvest. As she sipped her coffee, the salty breeze from the open window reminded her of the coastal town where she'd chosen to dig deeper. Today, she'd return as Marisol, the unassuming retiree, but with a sharper focus. She needed to understand the full scope of the dysfunction, how far it reached, who was responsible, and what it would take to fix it. She pulled on her cardigan, adjusted her silver wig, and drove toward the store, the rising sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. When she arrived, the parking lot was still quiet, save for a delivery truck idling near the loading dock. Elena clocked in and shuffled toward the stockroom, where Priya was already unpacking a crate of avocados. The young woman's movements were brisk but weary, her shoulders slumped as if carrying more than just the weight of the fruit. "Morning, Marisol," Priya said without looking up. You're back for more punishment, huh? Elena chuckled softly, keeping her tone light. Guess I'm a glutton for it. How's your day starting? Priya sighed, tossing a bruised avocado into a discard bin. Same as always. Late delivery, short staff, and Victor's already in a mood. He's been on the phone yelling at someone since I got here. Elena glanced toward the manager's office, a glass-walled box at the back of the store. Victor paced inside, his voice muffled but sharp, gesturing wildly with one hand while clutching a coffee mug in the other. She turned back to Priya. Does he ever help out here? Priya smirked, but it was tinged with bitterness. Help? No. He's too busy playing king of the castle. Last month, we had a rush so bad I was sweating through my shirt, and he just sat there texting. Said it's not his job to stock shelves. Elena's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd hired managers to lead, not lord over their teams. As the morning wore on, she shadowed Priya through the aisles, listening as the young woman vented about the little things that added up, inconsistent schedules posted last minute, broken equipment that forced them to improvise, and a lack of appreciation that stung deeper than any paycheck could fix. I used to love this job, Priya admitted, pausing to adjust a display of organic honey. The customers are great, and I believe in what Sunlit stands for. But it's hard to care when no one cares about us. Before Elena could respond, Victor's voice crackled over the intercom. Priya, Javier, front of the store, now. Spill by the registers. Priya rolled her eyes. Here we go. They hurried to the front, where a puddle of spilled almond milk glistened under the fluorescent lights. Javier was already there, mop in hand, his face flushed. Victor stood nearby, arms crossed, barking orders. Faster, Javier. Customers are waiting. This is why I can't leave you alone for 5 minutes. Javier muttered something under his breath, and Victor snapped, what was that? Speak up. The teenager shrank back. Nothing, sir. Elena's chest burned. She grabbed a roll of paper towels and knelt beside Javier, soaking up the mess to ease his burden. Victor barely glanced at her. Marisol, you're not paid to play hero. Stick to stocking. She nodded meekly, but her mind raced. This wasn't leadership, it was intimidation. She'd seen enough to know Victor was a problem, but she needed more than anecdotes. She needed evidence. During a lull in the afternoon, Elena slipped into the break room, a cramped space with a wobbly table and a microwave that smelled faintly of burnt popcorn. Marcus, the cashier from yesterday, sat scrolling through his phone, his brow furrowed. She settled across from him, unwrapping a sandwich she'd brought to blend in. Long day? She asked casually. Marcus grunted. Long life, more like. Been here 2 years, and it's the same crap every shift. Victor's on my case because I didn't upsell enough yesterday. Like I'm supposed to force people to buy kale they don't want. Elena took a bite of her sandwich, chewing slowly to buy time. Does he ever give you a break? Marcus laughed, short and sharp. A break? Last week, I asked for a Saturday off, my daughter's birthday, and he said, maybe next year if you prove you're worth it. She's turning 6. I missed her party. His voice cracked, and he looked away, rubbing his eyes. Elena's heart clenched. She'd built Sunlit Harvest to support families, not tear them apart. The break room door swung open, and Priya stormed in, slamming her water bottle on the table. Unbelievable, she hissed. Victor just chewed me out because a customer complained about a wilted lettuce head. Like I'm the one growing it. Marcus shook his head. He's a jerk, Priya. I'm this close to walking out. Priya slumped into a chair. I'd join you, but I've got bills. My roommate just moved out, and rent's on me now. Elena listened, her sandwich forgotten. These weren't isolated gripes, they were symptoms of a culture gone rotten. She decided to test the waters further. "Have you ever tried talking to someone higher up?" she asked, keeping her tone curious. Priya snorted. "Like who? Corporate? They don't care. I sent an email once about the cooler breaking down, never heard back. Victor said it's not their problem." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, they're probably sipping lattes in some fancy office, laughing at us." The irony stung. Elena was corporate, and she wasn't laughing. She excused herself and stepped outside, pretending to take a call but needing air. The ocean breeze cooled her face as she leaned against the building, replaying their words. Her executive team had failed her, or worse, they'd hidden the truth. She pulled out her phone and texted her COO, Daniel, a trusted ally who knew about her undercover mission. "Check the complaint logs for Store 142. Look for equipment issues and employee feedback. Urgent." Daniel replied instantly, "On it." "Anything else?" "Not yet," she typed. "But I'm just getting started." Back inside, the day spiraled into chaos. A rush of customers overwhelmed the team, and Victor's absence was glaring. He stayed holed up in his office, emerging only to snap at Javier for a mislabeled price tag. By closing time, the staff was exhausted, their frustration palpable. Elena lingered as they clocked out, catching snippets of conversation. "I'm done," Javier muttered to Priya. "I'll flip burgers somewhere else before I take this much longer." Priya nodded. "Same. I just need a plan first." As Elena drove home, the coastal road blurred past, her mind a storm of emotions. Anger at Victor, guilt for her own blindness, and a fierce resolve to act. She couldn't fix everything overnight, but she could start. At home, she poured a glass of wine and opened her laptop, drafting a list: investigate Victor's conduct, audit the store's operations, and, most importantly, talk to her employees again. They'd given her the truth without knowing who she was. Now, she owed them action. Daniel's email arrived as she worked, found 3 unresolved complaints about the cooler at 142, plus a dozen others about scheduling and pay delays. No follow-up from regional management. Digging deeper tomorrow. Elena's grip tightened on her glass. This wasn't just Victor, it was a failure up the chain. She set the laptop aside and stared out at the moonlit ocean. Tomorrow, she'd push harder as Marisol, gathering the pieces she needed to confront the rot in her company. But tonight, she let herself feel the weight of it, the disappointment, the responsibility, the hope. Sunlit Harvest was her creation, and she'd fight to make it right, one step at a time. The third day dawned gray and misty, the coastal town shrouded in a fog that mirrored Elena Vasquez's swirling thoughts. As she drove to Sunlit Harvest, her disguise as Marisol felt heavier, not the wig or the prosthetics, but the weight of what she'd uncovered. 2 days undercover had revealed a store teetering on the edge, its employees stretched beyond their limits by a manager who ruled through fear rather than leadership. Today, Elena resolved to push the boundaries of her role, to provoke a reaction that would expose Victor's failings in a way she could no longer ignore. She parked her car a block away, took a deep breath, and shuffled toward the store, the damp air clinging to her cardigan. Inside, the atmosphere was tense from the moment she clocked in. The overnight crew had left a mess, half-unpacked crates littered the stockroom, and a faint sour smell hinted at spoiled produce hidden somewhere. Priya was already there, her sleeves rolled up as she sorted through a shipment of wilted spinach. "Morning, Marisol," she said, her voice flat. "Hope you're ready for hell. Victor's been screaming since 5 a.m. Elena glanced toward the manager's office, where Victor's silhouette loomed behind the glass, his phone pressed to his ear. "What's got him riled up now?" she asked, keeping her tone mild. Priya shrugged. "Who knows? Probably mad the world doesn't bow to him." Elena joined Priya in sorting the spinach, her hands moving slowly as she listened. The stockroom buzzed with quiet complaints, Javier muttering about a jammed pricing gun, a delivery driver griping about Victor's refusal to sign off on a late shipment. She decided to test Victor's patience herself. Grabbing a crate of apples, she approached his office and knocked softly. "Excuse me, sir," she said, peering through the door. "These apples came in bruised. Should I toss them or?" Victor cut her off, not even looking up from his clipboard. "Figure it out, Marisol. I'm not your babysitter." His tone was sharp, dismissive, and Elena felt a flicker of anger she quickly buried. "Yes, sir," she murmured, retreating. The morning unraveled from there. Customers trickled in early, and the team scrambled to keep up. Elena stayed close to the front, restocking shelves near the registers where Marcus worked. His fingers flew over the keys, but his face was a mask of exhaustion. During a brief lull, she sidled up to him. "You holding up okay?" she asked, arranging cans of soup. Marcus sighed, rubbing his neck. "Barely. Victor's got me on 6 days straight now. I asked for a breather, and he said, 'Prove you deserve it.' I'm one step from collapsing." Before Elena could respond, a crash echoed from the produce section. She turned to see Javier standing over a toppled display of oranges, his face pale. Victor stormed out of his office, his voice booming across the store. "Javier! What the hell is wrong with you? That's the third screw-up this week." Customers glanced over, some whispering, others hurrying away. Javier stammered, "It was an accident." The shelf wobbled. Victor cut him off. "Excuses. You're costing me money, kid. Maybe I should dock your pay to teach you a lesson." Javier's shoulders slumped, and Elena saw his hands tremble as he bent to gather the scattered fruit. That was it, the breaking point. Elena couldn't stay silent, even as Marisol. She stepped forward, her voice steady but soft. "Sir, it wasn't his fault. The shelf's been loose all morning, I noticed it myself." Victor whirled on her, his eyes narrowing. "You again? Stay out of this, Marisol. You've been here 3 days, don't act like you run the place." Priya, who'd rushed over to help Javier, spoke up too. "She's right, Victor. That shelf's been a hazard for weeks. We've told you." Victor's face reddened. "Enough. All of you, back to work, or I'll find people who can handle it." The tension hung thick, customers watching as Victor retreated to his office, slamming the door. Priya knelt beside Javier, whispering, "Don't let him get to you." Javier nodded, but his eyes were glassy. Elena's fists clenched beneath her cardigan. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was cruelty. She needed to act, but she couldn't blow her cover yet. Instead, she spent the rest of the shift observing, collecting every detail: Victor's absence during a midday rush, his barked orders over the headset, the way the team flinched when his voice crackled through. By late afternoon, the store hit its peak chaos. A line snaked from the registers, and the cooler, still unfixed, leaked water across the floor. Marcus slipped while carrying a crate, twisting his ankle, and Victor's response was to yell, "Walk it off, Marcus. We don't have time for drama." Elena helped Marcus to the break room, fetching ice from the freezer while he winced. "Thanks, Marisol," he muttered. "You're the only one who gives a damn around here." She smiled faintly. "Someone has to." As the shift ended, Elena lingered, watching the team clock out. Priya pulled her aside near the exit. "You're tougher than you look, Marisol. Sticking up for Javier like that? Most newbies wouldn't dare." Elena shrugged. "Didn't seem right, him taking the blame." Priya nodded. "It's never right here. I'm giving it 1 more month, then I'm out. Javier's already applying elsewhere." Elena's chest tightened. She wanted to promise change, but Marisol couldn't. Instead, she said, "Take care of yourself, Priya. You deserve better." Priya smiled weakly. "Yeah, maybe." In her car, Elena shed the wig and glasses, her hands shaking with fury. She called Daniel, her COO, her voice low but firm. "It's worse than I thought. Victor's a bully, the store's falling apart, and the staff's ready to walk. I need you and Lena from HR here tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. Blend in, observe first, then we'll move." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Got it. What's the play?" Elena stared at the store's glowing sign. "I'm ending this charade. Victor's done, and we're fixing this place, starting with the people who've held it together." At home, she paced her living room, the ocean roaring outside. Daniel's earlier report had confirmed systemic issues, unaddressed complaints, ignored maintenance requests, regional managers turning a blind eye. Victor was a symptom, not the disease. She drafted an email to her executive team, scheduling an emergency meeting for the following week. Then she sat with her notebook, writing, "Priya, resilient, overworked. Javier, young, breaking. Marcus, loyal, burned out." These weren't just names, they were the heart of Sunlit Harvest, and she'd failed them. But not anymore. Sleep eluded her that night. She stood on her balcony, the fog lifting to reveal a starry sky. Tomorrow, she'd confront Victor as Elena Vasquez, not Marisol. She'd apologize to her team, not just with words but with action. Raises, better schedules, fixed equipment, those were the bare minimum. She'd also launch a full audit of every store, root out every Victor, and rebuild the culture she'd promised when Sunlit Harvest began. The road ahead was daunting, but Elena thrived on challenges. She'd turned a roadside stand into an empire once. Now, she'd turn that empire into something her employees could believe in again. As the first light crept over the horizon, Elena felt a quiet resolve settle in. Victor's reign ended tomorrow, but the real work, restoring trust, started then too. She'd fight for Priya, Javier, Marcus, and every worker she'd let down. Sunlit Harvest wasn't just her legacy, it was theirs, and she'd make damn sure it shone again. The morning of Elena Vasquez's reckoning arrived with a clarity that cut through the coastal fog. March 16, 2025, marked not just another day, but a turning point for Sunlit Harvest. Elena stood in her kitchen, sipping coffee as the sun rose over the ocean, its golden light reflecting her resolve. Today, she'd shed Marisol's disguise for good and confront the mess she'd uncovered, not as an observer, but as the CEO determined to reclaim her company's soul. She dressed in a crisp blazer and slacks, her silver-streaked hair pulled back, a stark contrast to the wiry wig she'd worn for days. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, "Lena and I are en route. See you at 9. Elena nodded to herself. It was time. She arrived at store 142 just before 9 a.m., parking discreetly down the street. Daniel and Lena, her COO and HR director, met her there, blending in with casual jackets and baseball caps. "We'll watch the morning shift," Daniel said, his voice low. "Give you the lay of the land before you step in." Elena nodded. "Focus on Victor, his interactions, his absence. I want everything documented." Lena adjusted her cap. "Got it. We'll signal you when it's clear." They slipped inside, posing as customers, while Elena waited in her car, her pulse steady but quick. Through the store's glass doors, she glimpsed the familiar chaos. Priya darted between aisles, restocking shelves with a hurried grace. Javier swept the floor near the registers, his movements sluggish. Marcus rang up a line of customers, his ankle still taped from yesterday's fall. And Victor lounged in his office, feet propped on the desk, scrolling his phone as the team scrambled. Elena's jaw tightened. 3 days as Marisol had shown her the truth, now, she'd act on it. At 10:30, Daniel texted, "Rush is dying down. Victor's still in his cave. Now's your window." Elena stepped out of her car, her heels clicking against the pavement as she strode toward the entrance. The bell chimed as she entered, and heads turned, customers first, then staff. Priya paused mid-stack, her eyes narrowing in recognition. Javier froze, broom in hand. Marcus glanced up from the register, his brow furrowing. Elena walked straight to the center of the store and raised her voice. "Everyone, please gather here. Staff and customers, I have something to say." The team hesitated, exchanging glances, but slowly complied. Victor emerged from his office, irritation etched on his face. "What's this about?" he snapped, then froze as Elena met his gaze. "Victor," she said, her tone calm but unyielding, "I'm Elena Vasquez, founder and CEO of Sunlit Harvest. For the past 3 days, I've been working here undercover as Marisol." A gasp rippled through the group. Priya's hand flew to her mouth, Javier's eyes widened, and Marcus muttered, "No way." Elena removed her glasses, Marisol's prop, and set them on a nearby shelf. "I came because I heard rumors, turnover, complaints, a company slipping from the values I built it on. I needed the truth, and I got it from you." She scanned the room, her gaze settling on Priya, Javier, and Marcus. "You've held this place together despite broken equipment, impossible schedules, and a manager who's failed you. I'm sorry. That's not the Sunlit Harvest I created, and it ends today." Victor shifted, his face paling. "Ms. Vasquez, I can explain," she held up a hand. "Save it. I've seen enough. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into your conduct. Daniel, escort him out." Daniel stepped forward, motioning Victor toward the door. The manager sputtered, "This is ridiculous. I've kept this store running." Elena's eyes flashed. "No, they have. You've just taken the credit." Victor stormed out, Daniel trailing him, and the room fell silent. Elena turned to the staff. "I owe you more than an apology, I owe you change. Starting now, Priya, Javier, Marcus, you're getting raises for your dedication. Priya, I've seen your leadership, I'm offering you a mentorship program to move up if you want it. Javier, your hours will flex around school, your education matters. Marcus, you'll get the time off you need for your daughter, plus overtime pay you've been denied." Their faces lit up, Priya with cautious hope, Javier with disbelief, Marcus with a relieved smile. She continued, addressing the group. "This store's getting a full overhaul, new coolers, fixed shelves, reliable schedules posted 2 weeks in advance. I'm also launching a company-wide anonymous feedback system so your voices reach me directly, no filters. Every manager will undergo mandatory training, and we're auditing every location to root out what I found here. This isn't a promise, it's happening." A customer clapped, then another, until the store buzzed with applause. Priya stepped forward, her voice soft. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone cared." Elena met her eyes. "I do. You're the heart of this company, and I won't forget that again." The team dispersed, some shell-shocked, others energized, and Elena felt a weight lift, not fully, but enough to breathe. Over the next week, Elena didn't just walk away, she dove in. She returned to store 142 as herself, no disguise, meeting with the team daily. Priya accepted the mentorship, her sharp mind already suggesting inventory tweaks. Javier confided he'd stay if the changes stuck, his shy grin returning. Marcus brought his daughter to the store one afternoon, a 6-year-old with pigtails who hugged Elena's legs and said, "Thanks for letting Daddy come to my party." Elena knelt, smiling. "He's the hero here, not me." Behind the scenes, Daniel and Lena spearheaded the reforms. Victor's suspension became permanent after HR uncovered a trail of ignored complaints and falsified reports. Regional managers were reprimanded, some replaced, as Elena's audit revealed a web of neglect. She spent late nights at her coastal home, poring over feedback pouring in through the new system, some brutal, some hopeful, all fuel for her mission. Sunlit Harvest wasn't perfect yet, but it was moving. A month later, Elena stood outside store 142, the fog long gone, replaced by a crisp spring sun. The sign gleamed, planters overflowed with blooms, and inside, Priya trained a new hire with quiet confidence. Javier laughed with a customer, his posture relaxed. Marcus whistled as he rang up a sale, a photo of his daughter taped to his register. The store hummed with a vitality Elena hadn't felt in years. She'd kept her promise, raises were processed, equipment fixed, schedules humane. But more than that, she'd restored trust, one conversation at a time. Back home that evening, Elena sat on her balcony, a glass of wine in hand. The ocean stretched endless before her, a reminder of the journey ahead. She'd saved store 142, but 299 others waited. The executive meeting last week had been a reckoning, new policies rolled out, accountability tightened, her vision reaffirmed. Sunlit Harvest wasn't just surviving, it was thriving again, its roots deepening through the people who'd never given up. She opened her notebook, now filled with names and stories from across the chain. Priya, Javier, and Marcus were just the start. Every employee deserved what she'd fought for here, respect, support, a voice. Elena smiled, the sea breeze ruffling her hair. She'd built this company from a single stand, against all odds. Now, she'd rebuild it into something greater, not alone, but with the thousands who'd carried it when she couldn't. The sun dipped below the horizon, and Elena raised her glass to the twilight. This was her legacy, imperfect, resilient, and alive. And it was only the beginning.